November 21st, 1806. The Berlin Palace. The air is cold, thin, and crackles with the absolute authority of a man who has just shattered two empires in a single year. Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, is not merely occupying the Prussian capital. He is rewriting the fundamental rules of global power. The ink is wet on the document he holds. It is not a treaty of peace, but a declaration of economic war. The Berlin Decree. With a stroke of his pen, he announces a monumental, audacious, and profoundly arrogant plan, the Continental system. Imagine the sound. Not of cannons at Austerlitz or Jena, but the ominous silence of empty harbors, the creak of idle shipyards, and the anxious murmur of merchants from Amsterdam to Naples. Napoleon, seated amidst the splendor of a conquered palace, dictates terms to the continent. Britain, he declares, is now under a blockade. No ship from Britain or its colonies is to be allowed into any port of France or of its allies and conquered territories. No European nation is to trade with the British. His weapon is not the bayonet, but the ledger. His battlefield is not a field of mud, but the vast, gray expanse of the Atlantic Ocean and the North Sea. This is the culmination of a fury born of naval humiliation. Just a year earlier, off the coast of Spain at the Battle of Trafalgar, the Royal Navy under the ghost of Lord Nelson had permanently shattered Napoleon's dream of invading Britain. He could not cross the Channel, so he would strangle the island nation instead. Britain was a nation of shopkeepers, he sneered. He would bankrupt them. He would cut off their lifeblood, their trade, their exports, the flow of colonial sugar, tobacco, and cotton that fueled their economy and their war machine. This is his $100 billion gamble, though he would not know the figure. He gambles the stability of his entire empire, the loyalty of his subjects, and the peace of Europe on a single, simple theory. That Europe can survive without Britain, but Britain cannot survive without Europe. But look closer at the man in Berlin. The confidence is monumental, but the understanding is flawed. He sees maps as zones of control, people as obedient subjects, and economies as simple machines to be commanded. He does not see the deep, capillary networks of daily life. He does not see the Portuguese fisherman relying on British salt, the Prussian aristocrat yearning for Jamaican coffee, the French silk manufacturer in Lyon who cannot sell his goods without a British market. He issues the decree from a position of supreme military power, but the reality on the ground, on the docks, in the warehouses, in the peasant's cottage is infinitely more complex. Already the first crack appears. It is thousands of miles from Berlin in the bustling port of Lisbon. The Portuguese regent, faced with the emperor's ultimatum, looks to the sea. His choice is catastrophic: defy Napoleon and face the Grande Armée, or defy the Royal Navy and face economic ruin. He chooses the sea. The British fleet is not a piece on a map to him. It is the guarantor of his treasury and his throne. This first crucial breach in Napoleon's system will demand a violent response, setting in motion a chain of events that will pull the emperor deeper into a quagmire. But for now, in Berlin, the decree is law. The great cage of Europe is being constructed, lock by lock, from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. And Napoleon, the architect, does not yet realize he will be its most famous prisoner. December 1807. The Royal Palace in Milan, another throne room in another conquered city. The air is thick with the scent of beeswax and cold marble. Napoleon, having crushed the Russians at Friedland, is at the zenith of his power. Here, he signs the Milan decrees, tightening the screws of his continental system. Now, any neutral ship that submits to British inspection or even stops at a British port is declared lawful prize. He is not just blockading Britain, he is attempting to police the world's oceans from his palace. The system is no longer a policy, it is an obsession. A pan-European customs agency enforced by the point of a bayonet. But travel north to the windswept docks of Hamburg, a city choked by the emperor's will. Smugglers are the new infantry in this economic war. They are not soldiers, but desperate men and women in fast cutters and hidden compartments. British muslin is sewn into coffin linings. Cuban cigars are packed in false-bottomed barrels of Prussian flour. Colonial coffee, that addictive brown gold, travels in secret over frozen rivers and dark forest paths. The price of a pound of coffee in Paris triples, then quadruples. The very luxury Napoleon's rising bourgeois class craves becomes a symbol of his policy's failure. His own brother, Louis, installed as King of Holland, pleads for mercy for his people's ruined economy. Napoleon's reply is scathing. I have raised you to the throne, and the first thing you do is to betray me for a few herring and a bit of cod. The system demands absolute loyalty, even against human nature and geographic reality, and reality strikes back with geographic vengeance. Portugal's Defiance, that first crack, must be sealed. In 1807, Napoleon orders the invasion of the Iberian Peninsula. It is meant to be a swift police action. But when his armies march into Lisbon, then into Spain, deposing the Spanish Bourbons, they rip open a fatal wound. This is the turning point. The Spanish people do not see liberators, they see sacrilegious invaders. On the 2nd of May 1808 in Madrid, the tension explodes, not in a boardroom but in the sun-baked Plaza Mayor. Los madrileños, butchers, artisans, water carriers, attack the French Mameluke cavalry with kitchen knives and sheer fury. The reprisal is brutal, immortalized later by Goya's the 3rd of May. But the flame is lit. Now Napoleon faces not just smugglers but a nation in arms. The guerrilla, the Little War, is born. British aid, commanded by a new and stubborn general named Arthur Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington, flows into the port of Lisbon, now securely behind the lines of these Spanish partisans. The peninsula becomes a bleeding ulcer. "The Spanish affair is destroying me," Napoleon would later confess. It is a direct, monstrous consequence of the Continental system. To enforce his blockade against Britain, he has ignited a land war that will tie down 300,000 of his finest troops for years, sapping them in a relentless, brutal conflict of ambushes and sieges. Meanwhile, in the grand salons of Paris, the emperor tries to fabricate a continent without Britain. He orders the cultivation of sugar beet and the spread of chicory as a coffee substitute. He speaks of a new, self-sufficient Europe. But in the shadows, his police minister, Joseph Fauché, reports a grim truth. Discontent is rising. The system is creating not prosperity but scarcity, not unity but resentment. The iron cage is built, but it is straining at its hinges, and the keeper is now distracted, pouring his resources and his attention into the burning mountains of Spain to plug a leak that started with a simple trade decree. August 15, 1811. The Tuileries Palace, Paris. A grand reception for the emperor's birthday, but the celebration is a brittle facade. Napoleon studies a dispatch, his face a mask of cold fury. The report details not military movements but grain shipments. Wheat, hemp, and timber from Russia are flowing to British merchants through the Baltic, openly defying the Continental system. Tsar Alexander I, the young ruler he embraced on a raft at Tilsit, had become the system's most gaping breach. For Napoleon, this is not merely an economic annoyance. It is a personal betrayal and a fatal challenge to his entire conception of continental order. The logic of the blockade, now an unshakable dogma in his mind, demands a response. If the cage cannot hold the Russian bear, then the bear must be broken. Shift the scene to December 1811. In the map room of the Tuileries, Napoleon places a token representing the Grande Armée, not at the Pyrenees where his army bleeds in Spain, but far to the east on the banks of the Niemen River. "I have come to finish off once and for all the colossus of the barbarian north," he declares. The invasion of Russia is, at its heart, a gigantic enforcement action for the continental system. The $100 billion gamble is now hurtling toward its catastrophic, all-or-nothing climax. He assembles a force of over 600,000 men from across his empire, French, Italians, Poles, Germans, Dutch. It is the largest army Europe has ever seen, a multi-tongued monster raised not for conquest alone but for economic compliance. June 24, 1812. The Niemen River near Kovno. Under a blistering sun, the first pontoon bridges are laid. Watch the cavalry of the guard, their cuirasses gleaming, be the first to cross into Russian territory. There is no opposing army to meet them. Instead, they are met with a terrifying silence and a swirling cloud of dust. The Russians retreat, implementing a brutal policy of scorched earth. They burn their own villages, fields, and granaries. For Napoleon's army, living off the land was a fundamental strategy. Now the land offers only ash and hunger. The continental system was meant to starve Britain. Instead, it has led Napoleon's own legions into a starving void. The climax arrives not at a decisive battle, but in an empty, burning city. September 14, 1812. Moscow. Napoleon enters the Kremlin, expecting the keys to the city and a desperate czar suing for peace. What he finds is a ghost town, already set ablaze by retreating Russians and freed criminals. The fire rages for days, turning the city of palaces into an apocalyptic oven. For 5 weeks, Napoleon waits in the ashes for a surrender that will never come, while his strategic position freezes around him. The system has led him here to a hollow victory. The tool of economic warfare has demanded a military solution so vast, so overextended that it cannot be sustained. The order to retreat is the acknowledgement of a profound, irreversible failure. Now witness the true cost. The retreat from Moscow is not a military operation. It is the unmaking of an army. The Russian winter, which the emperor famously dismissed, arrives with savage ferocity. Temperatures plunge to -30 degrees Celsius. Horses die by the thousands, their carcasses becoming grim landmarks. Men without boots wrap their feet in rags. The road is littered with the frozen, blackened limbs of the fallen. Cossack cavalry harry the flanks like wolves. Discipline evaporates. The Grande Armée, the invincible instrument of the Berlin and Milan decrees, disintegrates into a starving, freezing mob. By the time the remnants stagger back across the Niemen in December, less than 40,000 frostbitten specters remain. The core of Napoleon's power is gone, sacrificed on the altar of his economic blockade. The Continental system, designed to bring Britain to its knees, has instead destroyed the military might that enforced it. The keeper of the cage is now exposed, vulnerable, and staggering home, while all of Europe watches the myth of his invincibility shatter in the snow. October 1813. Leipzig, Saxony. The thunder of cannon is not from a single battlefield, but from a ring of fire encircling an entire city. For 4 days, the battle of the nations rages. This is the direct, violent harvest sown by the Continental system. The nations whose economies Napoleon strangled, Prussia, Austria, the German states, have now risen armed and funded by British gold. That same British gold, flowing freely since the breach of the system, has bankrolled the coalition that now surrounds him. The very nations he forced into his economic alliance have turned their muskets against him. In the pouring rain and mud, his outnumbered army makes its last stand. Then a catastrophic mistake. The only bridge behind his lines is blown prematurely. Panic ensues. Thousands of French soldiers are trapped, captured, or drowned in the Ulster River. The retreat becomes a rout. The empire built on Austerlitz and Jena is unraveling at Leipzig, a direct consequence of the resentment and economic ruin his policies fueled. Follow the relentless tide back to France itself. By January 1814, the coalition armies are crossing the Rhine. The map of Europe, which Napoleon had redrawn with such arrogance, is being violently erased. But look beyond the marching columns. Visit the French countryside, the workshops of Lyon, the ports of Bordeaux. The cost is measured here in human terms. A generation of young men is gone, consumed in Spain and Russia. Markets are shattered. The lucrative trade with the Caribbean colonies has been decimated by the British Navy, which ruled the seas uncontested the moment Napoleon turned his back on the ports. The nation of shopkeepers has not been bankrupted. Its factories have powered the Allies and its ships have fed the world. Napoleon's fantasy of a self-sufficient continent has resulted in a destitute and exhausted France. April 11, 1814. The Palace of Fontainebleau. The atmosphere is funereal. Napoleon, defeated and abandoned by most of his marshals, signs the act of unconditional abdication. The document is not just a military surrender. It is the final balance sheet of the Continental system. In a quiet study, he is said to have calculated the cost. The men, the ships, the lost trade, the looted treasuries of Europe spent on his wars of enforcement. While the figure of $100 billion is a modern estimate, the scale of the waste was tragically clear to him in that moment. He had sought to impose his will on the tides of commerce, and those tides had drowned his empire. He is granted sovereignty over the tiny island of Elba, a bitter mockery of the continental system he once commanded. The final, ironic twist of his policy plays out after his dramatic, doomed return in 1815. The 100 Days ends at Waterloo, a battle where the Duke of Wellington's multinational army stands as the physical embodiment of the coalition the system created. But the more enduring defeat is sealed not on a Belgian field, but in the cabinet rooms of Vienna. The Congress of Europe redraws the map with one overriding goal: to create a balance of power that would prevent any single nation from ever attempting such a hegemonic blockade again. The British, whose economy had emerged stronger than ever, cement their naval and financial dominance for a century to come. The Continental system achieved the exact opposite of its intention. It made Britain the undisputed master of the global economic order. From the deck of HMS Northumberland, carrying him to final exile on St. Helena, Napoleon could gaze at the vast, British-controlled ocean. The waters he tried to close were now an open highway for his rival's power. His legacy was not a unified Europe under France, but a ravaged continent and a bankrupt treasury. The $100 billion mistake was more than a financial miscalculation. It was a profound failure to understand that economics, like human desire, cannot be commanded by decree. He built a cage of edicts and armies, and in the end, he was the one who was locked away by the world he tried to constrain.